I want to tell you something I've never quite said this plainly before. When I was a boy, 7, maybe 8 years old, I used to sit at the edge of things, the edge of the playground, the edge of the group at birthday parties, the edge of whatever room the adults were gathered in, close enough to hear, far enough that nobody expected me to participate. And I'd watch. I'd watch the way people moved around each other, the way a circle of kids would open for one person and close, almost without noticing, against another, the way an adult's face would say something completely different from the words coming out of their mouth. I saw all of it. I just didn't know what to do with what I was seeing. I went home from those places carrying things I couldn't name. Impressions, feelings about people, a sense of something underneath the surface of every interaction that nobody else seemed to be tracking. And I'd think, am I strange? Is everyone else just better at pretending they don't notice? For a long time, I thought being the quiet one was a waiting room, like I was waiting to become the other kind of person, the kind who walked into rooms and lit them up, the kind who knew, instinctively, how to take up the right amount of space. That person never showed up, but something else did, and it took me most of my life to understand what it was worth. Maybe you were that child too, the one who watched more than they spoke, who felt things at a volume the room didn't seem to share, who came home from ordinary days carrying a weight that was hard to explain and harder to put down. If that's you, stay with me tonight, because I want to talk about what actually happens to people like us, not what we feared would happen, what actually does. Let me start at the beginning, because I think the beginning matters more than we usually give it credit for. The quiet child doesn't usually know they're quiet, not at first. They just know that something about the way they move through the world is different from the way it seems to work for everyone else. Other kids seem to do things naturally, make friends, fill silence, step forward, that require real effort and attention from the quiet child. And because children are concrete thinkers, the quiet one tends to draw a simple conclusion. There is something wrong with me. That conclusion is almost never stated out loud. It just settles in, quietly, the way those children do everything. What's actually happening, and I've come to believe this deeply, is that some people are simply built to take in more than others, more detail, more subtext, more of the emotional weather in a room. And when you're taking in that much, you need time to process it. You need to stand at the edge and watch before you step in, because stepping in before you've understood the room feels genuinely dangerous in a way that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't experience it. I think some people simply move things through their minds more thoroughly before they respond. It makes them slower to act. It also makes them faster to understand. And in a room full of people, only the first half of that is visible. The quiet child isn't disengaged. They're working harder than almost anyone else in the room. They just have nothing to show for it yet. That's the part nobody sees. And not being seen, for years, sometimes decades, leaves a mark. School was a particular kind of difficulty for me, and I suspect for a lot of you, not academically necessarily. In my case, the quiet gave me time to read and think and sit with ideas in a way that served me in certain classes. But socially, school was a long lesson in invisibility. I remember sitting in a classroom and knowing the answer, knowing it clearly, having thought it through, understanding not just the answer, but the reason underneath the answer, and not raising my hand, not because I was afraid I was wrong, because something about putting myself into the center of the room felt like too much exposure, like stepping out from behind glass. So I stayed quiet, and someone else said the thing I was thinking, and the teacher nodded, and the class moved on. And I carried the small, particular ache of that, of being present without being counted, home with me. That feeling has a shape, even if it doesn't have a name. Being in the room without being in the room. Present, but not counted. And when that happens often enough, for long enough, something quietly gives way. The part of you that believed what you noticed was worth saying out loud. That erosion is real. It happens slowly. And by the time a quiet child becomes a quiet teenager and then a quiet young adult, it has usually done some genuine work on them. They've learned to edit themselves before they even open their mouths. They've learned that the room tends not to wait for them. They've learned, in some quiet but foundational way, to treat their own interior as a private matter. The world taught them that, and most of them believed it. Early adulthood was strange for me. I think it's strange for most quiet people, because something shifts when you leave the structure of school and enter a world where the rules are less fixed. For the first time, you get to choose, at least partially, which rooms you walk into and which ones you don't. And the quiet ones, the ones who spent years being overlooked in rooms they were required to inhabit, often discover something unexpected. In the right room, with the right people, they're not invisible at all. I remember the first time someone looked at me across a table and said, "You notice things most people miss, don't you?" Not as a compliment exactly, more as an observation, like they were naming something they'd been trying to place, and I didn't know what to say, because I'd spent so long treating my tendency to watch and listen as a kind of deficit, as evidence of something I lacked, that I hadn't considered it might be something I had. Here's what I've come to understand, slowly and not without cost. The quiet ones become, over time, unusually accurate readers of people, not because they have a gift exactly, but because they've spent decades paying attention to things most people were too busy talking to notice. The way someone's energy shifts when a certain topic comes up, the difference between the laugh that's genuine and the one that's performing. The moment in a conversation when the other person stops being present and starts just waiting. Most people learn these things partially, or not at all. The quiet ones learn them the way you learn anything you've spent a lifetime studying. But the cost of that education is real, and I don't want to skip past it. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about spending your life as an observer. It can make you feel very profoundly like you are always watching from outside the glass. You understand people deeply. You feel the weight of rooms, the texture of dynamics, the unspoken architecture of every relationship you've ever been part of. And yet, there can be a persistent, quiet grief in all of that. The grief of the person who can read the music but has never quite learned to dance in it, who understands intimacy clearly, has thought about it more carefully than most, but carries a lingering uncertainty about whether they are fully available to it. Whether the habit of watching, of standing at the edge, of processing before participating, has made connection harder as well as deeper. I lived with that grief for a long time without naming it. I thought I was fine. I thought my life had a different shape than most people's, and that was all right. And on the surface, it was. But underneath, there was sometimes this low ache. Not loneliness exactly. I've made peace with solitude, something more specific. The ache of wondering whether the life you've built inside your own head is the life you were meant to be living, or whether somewhere along the way you confused watching the world for inhabiting it. I'm not going to tie that up too neatly, because I think if you've felt it, you know it doesn't tie up neatly. It just becomes something you carry more lightly as the years go on. And that's where the turn is. For me, at least. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment where I understood everything and the grief lifted. It was more like a slow accumulation of evidence against the story I'd been telling myself since I was 8 years old. The story was, you were missing something. Everyone else got something you didn't. The quiet is the problem. The watching is the problem. The depth is the problem. If you were different, louder, easier, less interior, your life would have opened up in ways it didn't. I don't believe that story anymore. What I believe now is this. The quiet ones don't miss the life. They live it differently. While other people were filling the room, they were reading it. While other people were being loud, they were becoming accurate. While other people were performing versions of themselves for every new audience, the quiet ones were, slowly and without much fanfare, becoming more genuinely themselves. That's not nothing. In fact, I think it might be everything. The person you are right now, the one who feels things carefully, who watches before they leap, who carries more inside than they tend to show, who understands people in a way that sometimes feels like a burden and sometimes feels like a strange, unasked for gift. That person was built by all of it. The edges of playgrounds, the classrooms where you knew the answer and didn't raise your hand, the long evenings alone with your own thoughts, the relationships that asked more of you than you got back. All of it built something. What it built was a human being with a genuine interior. And that is rarer than it sounds. The world produces plenty of people who are good at being in rooms. It produces far fewer people who know what's actually happening in them. You are one of the second kind. And I think if you've spent any of your life wondering whether the quiet was a flaw, it's worth sitting with the possibility that it wasn't. That it was, and is, the very thing that makes you capable of the kind of seeing and feeling and understanding that most people spend their whole lives reaching for without quite arriving. For years, I thought being the quiet one meant I had missed something. Now, I think I was paying attention to everything that mattered. And there is no version of that I would trade. I'll leave you with this. What happens to the quiet ones? They become the people who notice, the people other people come to when they need to be truly heard, the people in the room who can feel what isn't being said, the people who, later in life, find a kind of peace in their own company that those who always needed noise never quite find. They carry more than their share for a long time, and then, slowly, they learn that what they were carrying wasn't weight. It was depth. You don't have to perform more. You don't have to take up more space. You don't have to become the other kind of person. The life available to someone who feels and sees as carefully as you do is not a smaller life. It is a different one. And different, in this case, is not less. Tell me in the comments, were you the quiet one? The child at the edge of things, watching the room, carrying more than you showed? I'd like to know. Because I think there are more of us out here than the world tends to notice. And if you want to sit with me again, subscribe. I'll be here. I'm Daniel. I'll see you in the late hours.